Kyle Henderson stepped off the transport ship and felt the artificial gravity of Centauri Prime settle around him like a heavy blanket. The air tasted different here, processed through alien filters that left a metallic tang on his tongue. He adjusted his diplomatic uniform and checked the time on his wrist display. In 30 minutes, he would become the first human ever to work at the Galactic Cartographic Institute. The thought made his stomach twist with nervous energy. Kyle had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, learning alien languages and studying galactic politics. The Terran Federation had chosen him carefully. He was young enough to adapt but experienced enough to handle the pressure. His job was simple in theory but complex in practice. He would represent humanity's interests while learning how the galaxy's most important maps were made. The Institute controlled all official star charts, hyperspace routes, and navigation data. Without their maps, interstellar travel would be nearly impossible. Ships would get lost in the vast emptiness between stars or crash into gravity wells they never saw coming. Kyle walked through the spaceport corridors, following signs written in 12 different languages. The symbols hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. Some were geometric patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Others pulsed with colors that human eyes could barely see. The diversity of alien life still amazed him, even after years of diplomatic training. He passed a group of tall, insect-like beings whose wings made soft humming sounds as they talked. Near them stood a creature that looked like living crystal, its faceted surface reflecting the corridor lights in rainbow patterns. Kyle tried not to stare but found himself fascinated by how different they all were. The Institute building rose before him like a mountain of dark metal and glass. Its surface was covered in moving patterns that might have been decorative or functional. Kyle couldn't tell the difference. The main entrance was a circular opening that dilated like an eye as he approached. Inside, the lobby stretched upward for what seemed like miles. Floating platforms carried beings between different levels while streams of data flowed across transparent walls like digital waterfalls. Kyle felt very small and very human in this place. A voice spoke behind him in perfect English. Kyle turned to see a being with smooth gray skin and large black eyes approaching. Its body was humanoid but wrong in subtle ways. The proportions were slightly off, like someone had stretched a human and then compressed them in different places. When it moved, its skin shifted colors from gray to blue to purple in waves that followed its emotions. Kyle had studied this species during his preparation. They were called the hegemony, and they were some of the oldest spacefaring people in the galaxy. Their color changes were involuntary, like human blushing, but more complex. Blue meant calm, purple meant anxiety, and red meant anger or fear. Right now, Kyle's guide was a steady blue. Good. The being introduced itself as Senior Cartographer Vexthal. Its voice had a musical quality that made Kyle think of wind chimes. Vexthal explained that it would be Kyle's mentor and guide during his time at the Institute. The formal words were polite, but Kyle sensed something underneath them. A carefulness that went beyond normal diplomatic protocol. They walked through corridors lined with holographic displays showing star systems and trade routes. Kyle tried to take in everything at once. The scale was overwhelming. The Institute mapped territory that spanned hundreds of thousands of light years, billions of stars, millions of inhabited worlds, countless space stations, and asteroid colonies. It was the largest and most detailed map of the galaxy that had ever been created. They entered what Vexthal called the Central Cartography Chamber. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. The room was a perfect sphere with no visible floor or ceiling. They stood on a transparent platform suspended in the center, while the galaxy rotated slowly around them. Stars glittered like diamonds against the dark backdrop of space. Trade routes appeared as glowing lines connecting system to system. Military patrol zones were marked in red. Diplomatic territories showed up in different colors. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Vexthal began explaining how the maps were updated and maintained. Teams of cartographers worked constantly to track changes in political boundaries, new colonies, and emerging hyperspace routes. The information came from thousands of sources across the galaxy. Traders, explorers, military scouts, and diplomatic missions all contributed data. The Institute processed it all and created the official charts that everyone used. Kyle listened carefully, but his attention kept drifting to something that bothered him. He studied the massive galactic display, trying to figure out what felt wrong. The Milky Way galaxy spread out around them in all its glory, but something was missing. Kyle had memorized the basic layout during his training. He knew where human space was supposed to be located, The solar system sat on the outer edge of one of the galaxy's spiral arms, about 26,000 light-years from the galactic center. Human colonies spread out from Earth in a rough sphere about 50 light-years across. It wasn't much compared to the older civilizations, but it should still be visible on a map this detailed. Kyle looked more carefully. He found the right spiral arm and traced it to where human territory should be. There was nothing there. No stars marked as human colonies, no trade routes leading to Earth, no indication that humans existed at all. It was just empty space on the map. Kyle felt a chill run down his spine. This couldn't be right. The Terran Federation had been in contact with galactic civilization for almost 20 years. Human ships traveled to dozens of alien worlds. There were human embassies on 12 different planets. Yet according to this map, human space simply didn't exist. Kyle looked around the chamber and noticed something else that made his skin crawl. Every alien in the room had stopped working. They were all watching him. Some tried to be subtle about it, glancing in his direction when they thought he wasn't looking. Others stared openly with expressions Kyle couldn't read. The air felt thick with tension. Vexthul had stopped talking and was looking at Kyle with concern. Its skin had shifted from blue to a deep purple. That meant anxiety or fear. Kyle pointed to where human space should be and asked why it wasn't shown on the map. Vexthul's color deepened to an almost black purple. The being seemed to struggle with how to answer. Finally, it said that human territory was currently under review and hadn't been added to the official charts yet. The explanation sounded rehearsed and hollow. Kyle pressed for more details. When would the review be complete? Who was conducting it? Why was it taking so long? Vexthul became more agitated with each question. Its skin flickered between purple and red now. Red meant fear. Kyle realized he had stumbled onto something important and dangerous. This wasn't a bureaucratic oversight or a simple delay. The absence of human space from the galactic map was deliberate. Someone had made a conscious decision to leave humanity off the charts. But why? What were they afraid of? Kyle looked around the chamber again and saw the fear in alien eyes. They weren't afraid of what humans might do to them. They were afraid of something else entirely. Something about humanity itself that Kyle didn't understand yet. But he was going to find out. Kyle Henderson stepped off the transport shuttle and looked up at the massive crystal towers of Centauri Prime. The air smelled different here, like ozone and something sweet he could not name. Purple clouds drifted across 3 different suns in the sky above him. He had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that he was finally here, as Earth's first representative to the Galactic Cartographic Institute, his stomach felt tight with nerves. A tall figure approached him across the landing platform. The alien had blue-green skin that seemed to shift colors as it moved, and forearms that gestured in complex patterns as it walked. Kyle recognized the species from his briefings. This was one of the hegemony cartographers. "Welcome to Centauri Prime, Ambassador Henderson. I am Senior Cartographer Vexthul. We have been waiting for this day for some time. The idea that humans would join our mapping efforts seemed impossible just a few years ago." Kyle shook hands with 2 of Vexthul's forearms, trying to remember the proper greeting protocol. "Thank you for having me. I know humans are new to galactic society, but we have always been good at making maps. We mapped our entire planet before we even left it." Vexthul's skin shifted to a lighter green color. "Yes, we have heard about human mapping skills. Very thorough. Very detailed. Perhaps too detailed in some cases. But come, let me show you the Institute. You will find it most impressive." They walked through corridors that seemed to be carved from single pieces of crystal. Other aliens moved past them, some floating, some walking on multiple legs, others that looked like living clouds of gas. Kyle had studied alien biology for months, but seeing so many different species in person still amazed him. "The Institute has been mapping the galaxy for over 12,000 years, Vexthul explained as they walked. "We chart star systems, hyperspace routes, trade lanes, and everything needed for safe travel between worlds. Without our maps, galactic civilization would be impossible." They entered a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling that stretched up so high Kyle could barely see the top. In the center of the room hung a massive 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Stars glowed like tiny jewels connected by flowing lines of light that showed the major travel routes. Dozens of aliens worked at stations around the edges of the chamber, updating information and adding new discoveries. "This is the Master Galactic Map," Vexthul said with obvious pride. Every explored system, every established route, every known civilization. It represents the combined knowledge of hundreds of species over thousands of years. Kyle stared at the enormous display, trying to take it all in. The galaxy was huge, with spiral arms stretching out in elegant curves dotted with millions of stars. Trade routes connected the major civilizations like a vast spider web of light. But as he studied the map more carefully, something seemed wrong. "Excuse me," Kyle said slowly, "but where is human space on this map? I know where Earth should be located, but I don't see it marked anywhere." Bexthel's skin immediately shifted to a deep purple color. The change was so sudden and dramatic that Kyle knew he had said something important. The alien's forearms moved in what Kyle now recognized as nervous gestures. "Human space is still under review," Bextel said quickly. "There are some technical issues with the mapping protocols in that region. Nothing to worry about. Come, let me show you the historical archives instead." Much more interesting for a new member of the Institute, but Kyle had spent years as a diplomatic attaché, learning to read body language and subtle signs of deception. Bextel was clearly uncomfortable in trying to change the subject. More importantly, Kyle noticed that every single alien in the massive chamber had stopped working and was now watching him. The silence stretched on for several seconds. Kyle could feel dozens of alien eyes focused on him. Some of the aliens had skin that changed colors like Bextel, and many of them were now showing the same deep purple shade. Others were making nervous sounds or moving in ways that suggested anxiety. "I understand that human space might be complicated to map," Kyle said carefully. "But surely there should be some indication of where we are located, even just a general region marker." Bextel's purple color deepened even more. "The historical archives really are fascinating, Ambassador. We have maps dating back to the very first interstellar civilizations. I think you would find them much more educational than current mapping concerns." Kyle nodded politely, but his mind was racing. This was not just an oversight or a technical problem. The complete absence of human space from the galactic map was deliberate. But why would the galaxy's most important mapping organization intentionally leave out an entire civilization? As Vexthal led him away from the central display, Kyle took one more look around the chamber. The aliens were slowly returning to their work, but he could see them glancing at him nervously. Whatever the reason for excluding human space from the official maps, it was something that made every species in the galaxy uncomfortable. Kyle had come to Centauri Prime expecting to help map unexplored regions of space. Instead, he had discovered that the most advanced mapping organization in the galaxy was actively hiding the location of his own species. The question was why, and Kyle was determined to find out the answer even if everyone else seemed afraid to discuss it. Kyle never made it back to his quarters that night. As he walked through the crystal corridors of the Institute, 3 figures in dark robes appeared from side passages and surrounded him. They moved with the kind of coordination that suggested they had done this many times before. "Ambassador Henderson," one of them said in a voice that sounded like wind through hollow metal. "The Preservation Committee requests your immediate attendance at an urgent meeting. Please come with us without resistance." Kyle had never heard of the Preservation Committee, but something about the way the figures moved told him that refusing was not an option. They led him to a hidden transport platform he had never seen before. Within minutes, they were aboard a ship that seemed to be made of the same crystal material as the Institute towers. The ship took them far from Centauri Prime to a space station that appeared on no official charts. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon and covered in technology that Kyle did not recognize. More importantly, it was heavily shielded in ways that would make it invisible to most scanning systems. Inside the station, Kyle was brought to a circular chamber where 12 beings waited for him. He recognized some of the species from his studies. The tall, crystalline architects who had built most of the galaxy's major space stations, the flowing energy forms of the eternal minds who were rumored to be older than recorded history, and several others that represented the first civilizations to achieve interstellar travel. "Welcome, Ambassador Henderson," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We are the Preservation Committee, guardians of galactic stability for over 15,000 years. We have brought you here because your recent investigations have approached dangerous territory." Kyle looked around the chamber, trying to keep his voice steady. I was simply trying to understand why human space is not included on galactic maps. As Earth's representative to the Cartographic Institute, I have a right to ask such questions. One of the architects stepped forward, its crystal body chiming softly as it moved. You have rights, human, but you also have responsibilities. The information you seek could destabilize everything we have built over millennia. Some knowledge is too dangerous to be widely known. An eternal mind flickered with brighter energy patterns. Show him the recordings, it suggested. Perhaps direct evidence will help him understand the magnitude of what we face. The chamber filled with holographic displays showing various star systems. Kyle watched in amazement as the recordings showed human colonies in locations that should have been impossible. There were cities floating in the coronas of active stars, research stations anchored to black holes, agricultural domes thriving in the vacuum of space between galaxies. These are not tricks or special technologies, the architect explained. These are examples of what happens when humans decide that the laws of physics are merely suggestions. Each of these colonies exists in environments that would instantly destroy any other known form of life. But that's impossible, Kyle protested. Even humans need oxygen and reasonable temperatures and radiation shielding. We're not magical beings. The eternal mind pulsed with what might have been amusement. Magic is simply science that we do not yet understand. Your species does not use magic. You unconsciously alter local reality to make survival possible. The environments around your colonies become less hostile without any apparent technological intervention. Another display showed time-lapse recordings of space around human colonies. Kyle watched in amazement as seemingly empty regions of space gradually became more stable and hospitable. Radiation levels decreased, temperature variations moderated, and gravitational anomalies smoothed out over time. Every time we have attempted to create complete maps of human territory, the architect continued, your species has expanded into new regions that were previously impossible to inhabit. It is as if the act of mapping human space somehow encourages humans to push into even more impossible territories. Kyle stared at the evidence before him. You're telling me that my species unconsciously changes reality itself, just by existing in hostile environments. The eternal mind's energy patterns shifted to deeper colors. We are telling you that your species represents a fundamental challenge to the stable order of the galaxy. Every other civilization accepts certain limitations as absolute. You do not. And somehow, reality adjusts to accommodate your refusal to accept the impossible. A third being that Kyle had not noticed before stepped into the light. It looked like a living shadow with too many eyes. We have maintained galactic peace for 15,000 years by ensuring that all civilizations understand and respect the natural boundaries of existence. Your species threatens that stability simply by existing. Kyle felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying that the galaxy sees humanity as a threat that needs to be contained? The architect's crystal body chimed again. We are saying that the galaxy sees humanity as a force of change that needs to be carefully managed. By keeping human space unmapped, we limit the expansion events that occur when your species feels the need to push into new territories. Kyle realized that he was not just learning about a conspiracy, he was being recruited into one. The most powerful beings in the galaxy wanted him to help them keep humanity safely contained by maintaining the fiction that human space was too complicated to map properly. Kyle returned to Centauri Prime with his mind racing and his heart heavy. 7 days to find a solution that could save humanity from either eternal imprisonment or complete destruction. He immediately contacted Lisa and Jake through secure channels, asking them to meet him at the most private location they could find. They gathered in Jake's apartment, which he had swept for surveillance devices just hours before. The walls were lined with signal-blocking material that Jake had installed when he first arrived. Kyle told them everything about his encounter with the Preservation Committee. Lisa's face went pale as she heard about humanity's supposed reality-altering abilities. Jake's expression grew darker with each detail about the threatened Revelation Protocol. When Kyle finished his account, the room fell silent except for the hum of the air recycling system. Lisa was the first to speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she said that Kyle's story explained everything she had found in her research. The ancient warnings about reality affecting species, the calendar resets that coincided with human technological breakthroughs, the careful restrictions on contact between humans and other civilizations. It all made sense now, but the knowledge felt like a crushing weight. Jake stood up and began pacing around the small room. His military training had taught him to think tactically, and he was already analyzing the situation like a battle scenario. The Preservation Committee held all the advantages. They had superior technology, vast resources, and millions of years of experience. They controlled the flow of information throughout the galaxy and could cut off human access to interstellar trade whenever they chose. Fighting them directly would be suicide. But Jake also knew that even the most powerful enemies had weaknesses. The committee's greatest strength was also their greatest vulnerability. They had operated in secrecy for so long that they had become dependent on it. Their power came from the fact that younger species didn't know they existed. If that secret was revealed, their carefully maintained control structure might collapse. Lisa had been thinking along similar lines. She pulled out her datapad and began showing them some of her most recent discoveries. While Kyle was meeting with the committee, she had been digging deeper into ancient archives. She had found references to previous reality-affecting species and how they had been dealt with. The records were fragmentary and heavily censored, but a pattern emerged. In every case, the species had been eliminated not through direct military action, but through manipulation of their environment. The committee would gradually make their territory uninhabitable by subtly altering local physics. Stars would become unstable. Planets would drift out of their orbits. Hyperspace routes would become dangerous or impossible to navigate. The reality-affecting species would find themselves isolated and weakening until they either died out naturally or could be eliminated with minimal risk. Lisa believed the same fate was planned for humanity. The Revelation Protocol wasn't just about economic sanctions and military blockades. It was the first step in a process that would eventually lead to the complete elimination of human civilization. The thought made Kyle feel sick, but it also strengthened his resolve. He wasn't going to let the committee destroy his species, no matter how powerful they were. Over the next 3 days, the three friends worked frantically to develop a plan. Jake used his intelligence contacts to gather information about alien military capabilities and communication networks. Lisa continued her research into ancient civilizations and the committee's historical methods. Kyle studied the Institute's mapping procedures and began to understand how galactic charts were created and distributed. Their plan was audacious and probably suicidal, but it might be their only chance. Kyle would use his position at the Institute to create and distribute complete maps of human space to every major civilization simultaneously. The committee had warned that detailed maps would trigger expansion events, causing humans to spread into impossible territories. Kyle was counting on exactly that happening. If humans suddenly began establishing colonies in places that defied known physics, it would prove to the entire galaxy that reality-affecting species actually existed. The committee's secret would be exposed and their power would be broken. Jake would handle the technical aspects of the plan. His background in military communications gave him the skills needed to hack into the Institute's distribution networks. Once Kyle created the maps, Jake would ensure they reached every government, military organization, and scientific institution in the galaxy within hours. Lisa would document everything that happened afterward. Her expertise in xenoarchaeology made her uniquely qualified to record and analyze the expansion events that Kyle hoped to trigger. Her records would serve as proof that humans were indeed different from other species, but not necessarily dangerous. The plan had enormous risks. If Kyle was wrong about how other species would react to the revelation, the committee might implement even more drastic measures. If the expansion events were as dramatic as the committee feared, humans might accidentally damage or destroy other civilizations. If Jake's hacking attempts were detected too early, the committee might stop the distribution and eliminate all three of them. But doing nothing guaranteed humanity's eventual destruction. Kyle decided the risks were worth taking. On the 4th day, Kyle began working on the maps. He used his access to the Institute's archives to gather every piece of data about human space that existed. Official survey reports, trade route analyses, military patrol logs, diplomatic communications, and commercial shipping records. He combined it all into the most detailed and comprehensive chart of human territory that had ever been created. The process was exhausting and nerve-wracking. Kyle had to work carefully to avoid arousing suspicion while gathering vast amounts of classified information. He used his diplomatic clearance to access files that were normally restricted to senior Institute staff. He claimed he was preparing a presentation about human contributions to galactic cartography. Vexthul helped him more than Kyle had expected. The alien cartographer seemed to sense that something important was happening and provided Kyle with access to historical survey data that went back decades. Kyle suspected that Vexthul knew more about the situation than he was letting on. The being's skin color had been fluctuating between purple and blue for days, indicating high levels of stress and uncertainty. On the 5th day, Jake began his infiltration of the Institute's communication networks. His approach was subtle and patient. Rather than trying to hack directly into the main systems, he worked his way through peripheral networks and support systems, maintenance schedules, personnel databases, equipment inventories. Each small breach gave him more access to the overall network structure. By the 6th day, he had mapped the entire system and identified the best insertion points for their data burst. Lisa spent her time preparing for the aftermath. She set up monitoring systems to track news feeds, scientific reports, and diplomatic communications from across the galaxy. She created protocols for documenting any unusual events that might occur in human space. She also began drafting reports that would explain the situation to human authorities on Earth and the other colonies. Someone would need to help humanity understand what was about to happen to them. On the 7th day, Kyle received another untraceable message. The Preservation Committee was ready for his answer. The coordinates were the same as before, but this time Kyle had no intention of going alone and empty-handed. He sent a message back to the committee explaining that he needed a few more hours to finalize his decision. Then he activated his part of the plan. Kyle uploaded his completed maps to the Institute's central database and tagged them for immediate distribution to all registered recipients. Within minutes, the most detailed charts of human space and galactic history were being transmitted to thousands of destinations across the galaxy. Jake monitored the transmissions from his hidden access points, ensuring that the data reached every major government and organization. The upload was completed successfully, but they wouldn't know if their plan had worked until the expansion events began occurring. That could take days or weeks according to the committee's warnings. Kyle sent a final message to the Preservation Committee. He would not be attending their meeting. He would not help them contain humanity. Instead, he had just given the galaxy complete knowledge of human space and was prepared to deal with the consequences. The response came back within an hour. The message contained only 2 words, but they chilled Kyle to the bone. Protocol activated. The committee had begun implementing their contingency plans. Economic sanctions would begin immediately. Military forces were being mobilized to enforce the isolation of human space. The galaxy's most powerful beings had just declared war on humanity. Kyle looked at his friends and saw his own determination reflected in their faces. They had chosen their side and accepted the risks. Now they could only wait to see whether their desperate gamble would save their species or doom them all. In space stations and government buildings across the galaxy, alien leaders were receiving detailed maps of human territory for the first time in decades. Soon they would know the truth about humanity's place in the universe. The first expansion event happened 3 days after Kyle released the maps. A human research station studying stellar formation suddenly reported finding themselves inside the corona of a star that should have burned them to atoms instantly. Instead of dying, the research team discovered that their equipment was working better than ever. Their sensors could see deeper into stellar structure than any instruments in galactic history. Their computers processed data at impossible speeds. Most remarkably, they were able to send transmissions through the star's electromagnetic field with perfect clarity. The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within hours, every major civilization had received reports about the impossible human station. Scientists demanded explanations. Military leaders wanted to know if this represented a new form of warfare. Diplomats struggled to understand the implications for existing treaties and trade agreements. Kyle watched the chaos unfold from his position at the Institute. Alien cartographers rushed around the central cartography chamber in obvious panic, trying to update their maps to reflect the new human presence inside stellar matter. Vexthul's skin had turned a deep red that Kyle had never seen before. The being was terrified. By the end of the week, 17 more expansion events had been reported. Human colonies appeared in the upper atmospheres of gas giants, where the pressure should have crushed any known material. Mining operations were established on the surfaces of neutron stars, where gravity should have collapsed matter to subatomic density. Most dramatically, A human exploration ship was detected transmitting from inside the event horizon of a black hole, a location where time itself was supposed to stop. The galaxy's reaction was everything Kyle had hoped for and more. Young civilizations that had never heard of reality-affecting species demanded explanations from their elders. Scientists from dozens of worlds requested permission to study the impossible human settlements. Trade organizations began calculating the potential profits from technologies that could ignore fundamental physics. Most importantly, questions were being asked about who had been controlling information about humans and why. The Preservation Committee's carefully maintained secrecy was cracking under the pressure of too many witnesses and too much evidence. Lisa documented every report and every reaction with scientific precision. Her analysis revealed patterns that proved the committee's influence throughout galactic civilization. Restrictions on trade with humans that made no economic sense. Military protocols that avoided human space for unstated security reasons. Scientific research that was classified without explanation. The more she dug, the more obvious it became that the galaxy's most powerful beings had been manipulating everyone for thousands of years. Jake monitored military communications and discovered that the committee's revelation protocol was falling apart. The alien fleets that were supposed to blockade human space found themselves facing a logistical nightmare. How do you blockade colonies that exist inside stars or on the surfaces of neutron stars? Traditional weapons and defensive systems simply didn't work in the altered physics of human territory. Several alien commanders reported that their ships began experiencing equipment improvements when they approached human settlements, making their weapons more effective, but also proving that human influence was spreading to other species. Meanwhile, Kyle found himself at the center of a diplomatic storm. Representatives from dozens of civilizations arrived at Centauri Prime, demanding access to accurate maps of human space. They wanted to establish trade relationships with the reality affecting humans. They wanted to study human technology and learn how to replicate the expansion events. They wanted to understand how their own governments had kept them ignorant of such an important development. The Institute was overwhelmed by requests for information. Kyle realized that the committee's greatest fear was coming true. Knowledge of human capabilities was spreading faster than they could contain it. Other species were beginning to question the limitations that had been placed on their own development. If humans could establish colonies inside black holes, why couldn't other species do the same? If reality itself could be altered through consciousness and will, why had alien civilizations accepted physical limitations for so long? The breaking point came when a group of young alien scientists announced their intention to establish a research station near one of the impossible human colonies. They wanted to study the altered physics firsthand and learn how to replicate the effect for their own species. The committee tried to stop them by pressuring their governments, but too many people knew about the project. When the research station was successfully established and began reporting data that revolutionized their understanding of physics, other civilizations demanded similar opportunities. Within a month, the careful isolation of human space had completely collapsed. Dozens of alien research teams were working alongside human scientists to study the expansion events. Trade relationships were being established with human settlements in impossible locations. Cultural exchanges were bringing together species that had never been allowed to interact directly. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone could predict or control. Kyle received a final message from the Preservation Committee 6 weeks after releasing the maps. This time, the communication came through official channels rather than secret coordinates. The committee had decided to reveal themselves publicly and explain their historical role in galactic development. They requested a meeting with human representatives to discuss the new reality that Kyle's actions had created. The meeting took place on a neutral space station in the galactic core region. Kyle found himself sitting across from the same ancient beings who had threatened his species just 2 months earlier, but their attitude had changed completely. The architect's crystalline form seemed dimmer, as if the being was exhausted. The energy being flickered uncertainly, its usual confidence replaced by obvious uncertainty. Other committee members appeared equally affected by recent events. The architect spoke first, its voice lacking the authority Kyle remembered from their previous encounter. Kyle Henderson, your actions have accomplished what we believed impossible. You have exposed our existence and revealed the true nature of your species to the entire galaxy. The consequences are far beyond what we anticipated. Kyle asked what they meant. The energy being provided the answer. 36 civilizations have begun attempting to replicate human expansion events. 17 have succeeded in establishing settlements in previously impossible locations. The fundamental structure of galactic civilization is changing at an unprecedented rate. Other committee members reported similar developments across their territories. Ancient species that had remained stable for millions of years were suddenly pushing into new frontiers. Young civilizations were making technological leaps that should have taken centuries. The careful balance that the committee had maintained for so long was dissolving. But Kyle sensed that something else was happening. The committee members weren't just reporting changes in galactic civilization. They were describing their own transformation. The same forces that allowed humans to alter reality were beginning to affect the committee itself. Species that had transcended physical limitations millions of years ago were discovering new possibilities they had never imagined. The architect confirmed Kyle's suspicion. Your species has not just expanded its own capabilities. You have expanded the universe's definition of what is possible. We are beginning to understand forms of existence that were previously inconceivable. The committee had spent millions of years preserving a static version of reality. They had seen change as a threat to stability and had worked to prevent it wherever possible. But Kyle's actions had proven that change could lead to growth rather than destruction. The galaxy wasn't becoming more dangerous as different species pushed beyond their previous limitations. It was becoming more vibrant and full of possibilities. Kyle left the meeting with a new understanding of what humanity's place in the galaxy could be. His species wasn't a threat that needed to be contained. They were pioneers who could show other civilizations how to transcend the boundaries they had accepted for too long. The final scene of Kyle's adventure took place 6 months later, in the central cartography chamber of the Institute. He stood before the great galactic map, but it bore no resemblance to the static display he had first encountered. The map now changed constantly as new settlements appeared and impossible territories were explored. Human colonies were clearly marked, but they were no longer alone in defying physical laws. Dozens of other species had followed humanity's example and established their own presence in previously unreachable regions. The galaxy had become a dynamic, evolving space where the boundaries of possibility were pushed back every day. Vexthul stood beside Kyle, its skin showing a steady blue that indicated calm and contentment. The alien cartographer had embraced the new reality and was leading efforts to develop mapping techniques that could track the constantly changing nature of galactic civilization. Kyle smiled as he watched alien children learning to navigate using charts that were updated in real time. Their parents marveled at the new physics their species were